Hi, welcome to Pop Goes the Culture. Thanks for calling in. While you're waiting to be brought on the air, set up your computer or your phone or tablet properly to get the best possible picture and sound. We want you to look your best. You're going to be on TV. First, find a quiet spot with not a lot of noise, preferably away from the kids, pets, and traffic. If you have a headset, that will give you the best sound. If you're on your computer camera, don't lean in. Sit back and relax so that you're framed the same way you see people on TV, head and shoulders. You might even want to raise your computer up so that it's level with your face. Put it on a box or a book and make sure it's stable. If you're using a cell phone, see if you can get a simple cell phone tripod. They're easy to set up. If you don't have a tripod, no worries. Set the camera for selfies. Hold the phone about arm's distance from your face. Make sure it's landscape or horizontal, not portrait or vertical. Try to keep the camera level. Not too high, not too low. Make sure you can see your whole face and maybe shoulders in the frame. Next, find a nice light in front of you. Never sit in front of a bright window or light source. Turn around until you find the best light and background and the shot is looking attractive. This is a good shot. This one, not so much. Don't put your head too high or too low in the shot. Your eyes should be about 1/3 down from the top of the frame. Okay, now you're looking and sounding your best, and you're ready for your close-up. Keep watching, and maybe we'll be bringing you on the show soon.
Tonight on Ask Them Yourself, we are going to be talking about the new Gods movie and the new KRYPTON show on Sci-Fi Network. Go to www.askthemyourself.com and become part of the conversation. Call in now. Hey, I'm David Levin, and welcome to another intrepid episode of Ask Them Yourself. I'm your host for the next hour, but you are the guys we want to talk to. So go into www.askthemyourself.com, sign in. Tonight we are going to be talking about the New Gods movie that's being done by Ava DuVernay from DC Comics and Warner Brothers. We're also going to be talking about, also from DC, the new KRYPTON show that is airing on Sci-Fi that premiered last week and will be continuing this week. So we want to know what you think about it, not what I think about it. And so call in. Right after this message, we're going to go to your phone calls. So stick with us. We'll see you in a little bit.
This is for a new show called The Dick Van Dyke Show. I said, what's a Dick Van Dyke?
Our show, we tried to be timeless and just be about the American family.
I went a couple of months ago to do a comic book convention, and there were as many people there dressed like Bo Duke as were dressed like Superman.
After 5 years of playing that girl, I had become that woman.
I didn't want to play Lando as a black man. I wanted to play him because he was like this guy out in space somewhere.
Mary was the most unbelievable star I'd ever worked with.
The navel. Want to know about the navel?
Whatever you ask me, I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah, you know what? If I tell you, people think I'm an idiot.
Okay, imagine it's 1969. For the last few years, Marvel Comics has been nipping at DC Comics' heels. DC Comics was number one since the dawn of forever with Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and all the major iconic heroes that they had. But this little upstart comic book company called Marvel had been having a creative tsunami with characters from the Fantastic Four, the rebirth of Submariner, the rebirth of Captain America, new characters like Spider-Man and Thor and Hulk and the Ant-Man and the Wasp even, and the X-Men and Daredevil and the Avengers. And all these characters have been coming one after another, all from a guy named Lee and a guy named Ditko and a guy named Kirby and a bunch of other guys, but mostly it was Kirby and Lee turning out these amazing characters, including, just in the Fantastic Four alone, characters like Doctor Doom and the Inhumans and Black Panther. These are the kind of characters that were coming out one after another. The Silver Surfer, Galactus. And now it's around 1969, and although a significant portion of the work has been being done by Jack Kirby, it's the more charismatic Stan Lee, who loved the spotlight, who's out there marketing Marvel in a way that's making it a real fan-based, huge success, and almost up to number one with DC. Jack Kirby had been promised a little bit more credit. He had been promised a little bit more money, maybe a little bit extra, because up until that time, he had been turning out page after page after page for a page rate. And he's starting to get a little grumpy. Meanwhile, over across the street at DC Comics, they're sort of thinking, oh my gosh, Marvel's catching up to us. And they think that all of their eggs are in the basket of Mr. Jack Kirby. So what they do is they send Carmine Infantino over. This is very simplistic, but I'm just giving you the overview. Carmine Infantino goes over and meets with Jack Kirby at his California home and says, come over to DC Comics. Now, 10 years earlier, DC Comics had sort of kicked him to the curb because they didn't want Kirby there anymore because there were lots of sort of things going on. You can read about it in books. But now they wanted him back. And part of the reason they wanted him back was because they thought if Kirby leaves Marvel, Marvel's got nothing and the characters are not going to continue. So they offer Kirby a little bit more money, credit, the ability to write and create his own comic books. And Kirby bites. Kirby's like, okay, more money, more credit, my own comics, I get to do some writing. And he jumps ship. Now, in 1969, this was big news. 1969, 1970, right around the time the Beatles were breaking up. This is big news. It rocks the comic book world because now the guy who is currently drawing Thor, Captain America, and the Fantastic Four is jumping ship. Well, if you'd been paying attention at Marvel, Kirby had not really been creating any new great characters for a couple of years, and that's because he had been sort of squirreling them away. Kirby did not have the ability to not create. He was always creating new characters, all the time. But he took the new characters he was creating from about 1967 on and sort of tucking them away. And so in 1971, when he came over to DC Comics, he created an epic. And that epic is called The New Gods. It was the first of its kind, a group of interlocking comics that started in, of all places, Jimmy Olsen magazine, Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal, and Kirby sort of landed there, and all the hype was, Kirby is here! It was a big deal for Jack Kirby to be coming over to DC Comics. It was unbelievable, trust me. And there was no internet to announce it, so fandom was buzzing in a way it could not buzz now, and it was buzzing like crazy then. So Kirby moves over, and at that time, the artists and writers did not jump from company to company. It was like Kirby was at Marvel, he was a Marvel guy, Kurt Swan was at DC, he was a DC guy, but Kirby came to DC, and that was a big damn deal. So he created in fast succession the Forever People, Mr. Miracle, and the New Gods. And it was in those three comic books mainly that he introduced the saga of the New Gods, which included two large worlds. When the old gods died, the new gods were born, and you had New Genesis, is where all the good guys lived, and Apocalypse, which is where all the bad guys lived, and it was this horrible fascistic planet which was ruled by Darkseid, and New Genesis was ruled by Highfather, and Highfather was kind of a nice guy, a nice old man with a nice beard and a big staff. And just, if you haven't read this stuff, you should read it. It's available in a lot of hardback forms now. Read about the New Gods, but basically there's a lot of really amazing interconnected storytelling that had never been done in comic books before. Kirby really changed things up. Now, Kirby's dialogue was not for everyone. It didn't have the snappy patter of a Stan Lee. It was certainly not cool. Kirby was in his, I would say he was probably in his 50s, but he was really creative. And so his dialogue wasn't wonderful, but his plotting was second to none. And his artistry was epic. And he created this hugely cosmic comic book. And nobody had ever seen anything like it before. And I know when I saw it, it was like, it blew me out of the water, and it just made me hunger for more back in the day. So now, it looks like DC Universe is going to be creating, the DC Entertainment Universe is creating The New Gods as a movie. And it's being directed by the director of A Wrinkle in Time, Ava DuVernay. And she's getting mixed reviews, and fandom is sort of not certain how they feel about it. So I want to know how you feel about it. So again, come to www.askthemyourself.com. Come on in. We want to hear what you feel about the New Gods starting up. That's what we're here to talk about today. We will be back in just a second. Take a look at this and learn about how you can come on Ask Them Yourself, and we will be back with you in just a minute.
Hi, welcome to Pop Goes the Culture. Thanks for calling in. While you're waiting to be brought on the air, set up your computer or your phone or tablet properly to get the best possible picture and sound. We want you to look your best. You're going to be on TV. First, find a quiet spot with not a lot of noise, preferably away from the kids, pets, and traffic. If you have a headset, that will give you the best sound. If you're on your computer camera, don't lean in. Sit back and relax so that you're framed the same way you see people on TV, head and shoulders. You might even want to raise your computer up so that it's level with your face. Put it on a box or a book and make sure it's stable. If you're using a cell phone, see if you can get a simple cell phone tripod. They're easy to set up. If you don't have a tripod, no worries. Set the camera for selfies. Hold the phone about arm's distance from your face. Make sure it's landscape or horizontal, not portrait or vertical. Try to keep the camera level, not too high, not too low. Make sure you can see your whole face and maybe shoulders in the frame. Next, find a nice light in front of you. Never sit in front of a bright window or light source. Turn around until you find the best light and background and the shot is looking attractive. This is a good shot. This one, not so much. Don't put your head too high or too low in the shot. Your eyes should be about 1/3 down from the top of the frame. Okay, now you're looking and sounding your best, and you're ready for your close-up. Keep watching, and maybe we'll be bringing you on the show soon.
Okay, and we are here, and I am here with Jonathan and Steve Van Patten, Jonathan Bresman, and welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, what's happening?
So we're all fans here, I think. Steve, let's start with you. Steve was on the show last week. What do you think of the whole New Gods thing? Are you happy that it's going to be a movie? Did you like the comic book?
I did like the comic book to an extent. I didn't follow it religiously, but it was a fun little thing. And actually, it's sort of a late discovery for me because I ended up looking into it after Apocalypse had a few appearances on Superman, the animated series, and the Justice League cartoon and all of that. So then after that, I kind of did the old, sort of like backtracking, like, okay, Apocalypse, like, what's that all about? So I think, honestly, DC is, at this point, they're kind of lagging. I know earlier you did the whole history of Marvel trying to catch up to DC. Is like, well, now it's complete reversal of fortune, and Marvel is way ahead as far as successful movie goes, and DC needs a win, and I think that's what this is all about, and hopefully, for their sake, this is what they'll get.
Jonathan, what about you? What do you think?
I think on the one hand, I'm certainly excited about the opportunity of seeing some Kirby crackle, on the large screen. There's nothing like a Jack Kirby spread from the comics. But, at the same time, I do express some concern in that, DC's track record thus far, I think, is somewhat questionable. And I'm particularly concerned about, and I sort of mean no pun intended, sort of will there be sufficient humanity to these new gods, into this new god enterprise? I think on the one hand, it's smart of DC. It's an epic corner of their universe. It has Kirby roots. I think on the other hand, part of Marvel's successful package, right, is sort of the kind of glib, fast-talking Robert Downey Jr. And the new gods, if the new gods were starting with Jimmy Olsen and Funky Flashman, and maybe I'm getting a little too obscure with that, I think that might be sort of a good place to sort of plant the seed and sprout from. I am worried that this could just end up becoming something that's sort of too epic and too dark and doesn't kind of connect with fans, which is sort of the problem that I think DC has had so far, with the exception of Wonder Woman.
I think there's a lot to what you say. I mean, one character at a time is sort of a lot to digest. You want to, what Marvel has done with their groups, very much so, is to put their groups in after they've already established one after another. Each one of the individuals gets their own sort of time in the spotlight, and then they bring them together. But here, DC is sort of throwing everybody all at once. Thoughts? Go ahead.
Well, I think it ends up how well it's handled. I mean, in the introduction of Star Wars, for example, which I know New Gods is sort of compared to in certain ways, you get introduced to a lot of characters all at once in there. Honestly, it's the problem with DC. You are correct. The whole jam everything up in one movie just because we're trying to catch up with Marvel thing has not worked. So they're going to have to. It's going to come down to good writing, I think.
Always does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think also, and I don't want to be sort of heretical. Again, I don't mean a god heresy pun there, but on the one hand, I love the New Gods. On the other hand, I sort of feel that the New Gods, as you mentioned, because it's Kirby working solo and he doesn't have Lee there to kind of bring it back down to earth. I think a big issue with the New Gods is that it's great universe building, and it's beautiful to look at, and it has great mythic tropes to it. But I think that it's very easy to sort of slip into just the spectacle. And I would hope that they could sort of bring sort of the humanity and character that maybe was missing, I think, from the original, or parts of the original run, that Lee could have provided. Something that what's interesting about The New Gods is that it's this mix of, I think, the epic, but also some of the unintentionally ridiculous, right? What I think Kirby discovered, perhaps not to his liking with The New Gods, is that, you can make the Silver Surfer work, as ridiculous as it is, as he is, because Marvel has this kind of combination of wink and a nod and epic nature. Whereas the Black Racer in The New Gods, it's like Kirby just sort of pushed it a little too far, and instead of it being a Silver Surfer, it's a guy on skis with literal ski poles who is sort of the angel of death. And on the one hand, that's like great bonkers stuff. On the other hand, he didn't really pull it off, I think, without Lee balancing it there. And I will be curious who they bring in on the writing front. Maybe it's been announced. I don't know who the writer is going to be for the New Gods movie. But where do they sort of find that balance that I think Kirby didn't have when creating the New Gods is something that I'm very curious to see.
Yeah, and I would love to see who the casting is going to be in this thing. Do you guys have any thoughts about who they might want to put into this extravaganza?
Well, for Orion, maybe Jeffrey Dean Morgan, shave him up.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I'm thinking somebody who has a certain kind of gravitas, but with a sort of a wink and nod kind of a way. Like I think he could pull that off.
He's not that, but Orion has never been charming. It's almost like.
Right, he's kind of stiff, but for the sake of making him likable, maybe you get a likable actor.
Yeah. What about you, John? Any thoughts on who's going to be Orion?
Right. Yeah, I mean, actually, it's the casting of the New Gods. I think is a really interesting and I think difficult nut to crack because do you want to sort of go old school sort of sword and sandal movie, in terms of sort of the look? I mean, because I think if you were to make the New Gods back when Kirby was making this stuff, it would have been like a Charlton Heston movie, right? I mean, it's because I mean, Highfather is basically Moses, and I think that sort of generation of Charlton Heston, Kirk Douglas, I think those are the type of guys who you would have had to sort of cast in the New Gods back in the day. Although maybe they would have even been past their prime by the time you get to New Gods, and I'm not exactly sure sort of who is the equivalent today. I think New Gods was sort of made for that kind of that sort of school of acting that Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston and frankly William Shatner were all sort of a part of, kind of these square-jawed, cleft-jawed men. And I'm not even sure who that is today. Because sort of Kirby was creating New Gods in the early 70s, but when you think about sort of what happened in the 70s, and in terms of sort of that era of filmmaking, and then sort of coming after that era, and Star Wars is a great example, right? Star Wars the original Star Wars was kind of, I guess, a bridge, because in the 70s you had this transition to sort of more neurotic heroes. You sort of had the sort of the Dustin Hoffman, you had the Al Pacino, those type of guys. And, I think with Star Wars, you have sort of Carrie Fisher is sort of representing that more sort of idiosyncratic type of actor, and Harrison Ford kind of splits the difference between kind of Kirk Douglas handsome and then kind of wise guy-ish. I guess I'd be curious to see who ends up being in more of these kind of like Star Wars spin-offs. Does Alden Ehrenreich pull off Han Solo, and then in which case could he kind of be scot-free? I guess that doesn't really sort of answer your question and just sort of bounces back more questions.
It's going to be tough.
I'm sort of curious where they would go.
It's going to be tough getting these guys cast, I think.
Right.
Go ahead.
Gal Gadot's already done Wonder Woman, so she can't do Big Barda, right? Who's going to do Big Barda?
True enough.
Queen Latifah? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's...
Well, Barda was originally based on Lainey Kazan, I believe, right? I think Lainey might be a little long in the tooth to do it. I mean, she's still beautiful, but probably not the right person.
Right. Right.
Maybe she can be Granny.
Granny Goodness.
Right.
Goodness. Yeah.
Granny Goodness. Right.
Yeah. Someone suggested.
Yeah.
Somebody suggested Oprah Winfrey as Granny Goodness.
Oh wow.
Wow.
Well, if she's friends with the director, it may that may happen.
That could work, and as we know, Ava DuVernay has said on many occasions that Big Barda was her favorite superhero. So
That's
there
right.
you go.
Right. Right. I mean, I guess.
Yeah,
Go ahead. No, I was going to say for Highfather, who's sort of, well, I guess the voice of God, right? Morgan Freeman. I mean, I guess if Morgan Freeman's been God, he could be Highfather, the new God.
And who would you put as? Who do you think is Darkseid? Who do you think is Darkseid?
Ooh,
Could anybody play that?
Lance Henriksen.
Russell Crowe again.
Michael Shannon.
Michael Shannon, yeah. Shannon would be. He'd be good in anything, I think.
I mean, I know he just played Zod, but
well, similar. And should it be set in the DC Entertainment Universe? Should Superman be involved the way he was in his movie, or should they just sort of create a pocket for it to go?
I'd go with that.
Maybe not the first movie.
And then later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not the first movie. Let Orion and everybody else establish themselves, and then later on, bring in everybody else, and then
bring in the
for all
Forever
intents and
people.
purposes, maybe rescue the Lantern franchise. Work some other stuff in, like that kind of way. Maybe
I would just put the kibosh on the DC universe. Just have a crisis and just start over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the appeal about the New Gods, in that they can be their own sort of sealed off pocket, like you say. And that way, you don't necessarily have to sort of carry the baggage, and I guess the wounds that the DC universe has suffered. I think it can be an entity unto itself, and maybe that's the go. I mean, I would maybe hope that that's what they'll go for.
Yeah, I think that's part of what they got to be going for. They got to, they need to retrench on what they've done so far. I think the minute they had Superman kill Zod in the first movie, they went down a path that just sort of like, that moment where Lois Lane says to him, "You saved us all," and like Metropolis is crumbled. You saved who? Who did you save? You saved us all? What about the millions of people who died? And then they had to deal with it in the next movie, and that was, putting Wonder Woman in World War I think was probably the only thing they could do, and that's why it was successful, because it was unto itself. You could sort of watch it without knowing about any other movies.
True.
Right.
Plus, if they had put her in World War II, then it would have been the Captain America movie all over again.
That's a very good point. I hadn't even thought of that, but that's true.
Yeah. That
is true.
Right. I'm curious, like, where do you... Well, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead. Ask your question, John.
I'm just sort of curious where... what would sort of be their entry point into the New Gods story? Where would they start? I mean, would they start with the sort of, and then the old gods died? Would they start with, will there be a Jimmy Olsen, who's sort of representing the viewer who brings you into this world? Are they going to be starting with Intergang? Someone stumbles across Intergang who's getting weapons from, this sort of other worldly, godly stuff. I mean, this is stuff that I'm a little bit worried about, because I think New Gods is so epic, and how do you make it four quadrant, to appeal to young and old and men and women, the way Wonder Woman ended up sort of being so successful. What is sort of going to be who are sort of going to be the human elements, and how far afield do they go with this? Do we have Project Cadmus? Do we have DN aliens? Do we have all the hippie tropes going on? If they do have all the hippie tropes, do they sort of play it for laughs?
That never gets dated, does it?
What?
That never gets dated. Hippies.
Yeah.
That never gets
so much
dated.
Right. So much sort of bonkers stuff to the new gods that I think on the one hand it could be its strength. On the other hand, it could just be like, what is this?
The more we're talking about it, the more I think that they might even be better off just going with a solo story of Mr. Miracle. And which is first of all very upbeat, and then sneak in the subplots like, oh my God, this guy has this whole sort of backstory, and then as Oberyn, of course, you could probably get what's his name from Game of Thrones.
Right. Peter Dinklage.
Peter Dinklage would be a great Oberyn, I think. Now that Danny DeVito's aged out of the part, although he could play it too, and that could be a very fun way to sort of give us a human entry point in, and then sort of and sort of tease the new gods in on the next one, and sort of bring them in that way. What do you guys think? We mentioned earlier Star Wars. What do you guys think about the whole? I keep feeling like the jig is up for George Lucas and the Force and Dark Side. Like, are people going to think that Dark Side was stolen from Star Wars? Are people going to think that the Source was stolen from the Force? Or are people going to get it that, that somewhere along the line, this comic book, the Doctor Doom, that Jack Kirby had more of an impact on Star Wars than probably anybody at Lucasfilm would care to admit or think about. Thoughts?
Well, if we're already talking about it now, and all of that stuff is included in the film, I mean, let's face it, social media is gonna do what it does. They're gonna have all these comparisons and split screens and Lord knows what else. So, yeah, it's pretty safe bet that if any of that stuff with the Source and, like you said, if any of that's fully flushed out in the film, it's they're going to catch a little wreck behind that.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, although I wonder if it ends up being like, we all know this stuff, and maybe it spreads a little further, but I wonder if it ends up being sort of like Windows versus Windows stealing from Mac and Mac stealing from Xerox PARC, right? I mean, does it ultimately just come down to sort of who was successful with it first? George was successful with it on a large scale before Kirby was. I mean, the same way, Steve Jobs got pissed about Gates stealing Windows from him, but then Gates stole it from Xerox. And I think it ends up becoming, that sort of graphical user interface really ends up being sort of synonymous with Steve Jobs, even if he doesn't deserve that credit. So I wonder if it's too late, unfortunately, for Kirby and the Source, or if anything in the movie, they'll make a joke out of it. Like Jimmy Olsen hears about the Source and he'll be like, wait, don't you mean like the Force? I mean, I wonder if they'll do something like that.
Interesting.
That would probably be smart on their part.
So the one place that DC Comics has really had a tremendous amount of success on screen, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is on this not such a small screen anymore, but on the smaller screen on TV. They've been doing very well with the Flash and Arrow, the Arrowverse, and Black Lightning, and Smallville did very well certainly, and Gotham is going gangbusters, and now. And Lucifer, for Pete's sake, which bears very little resemblance to the comic book, and now Krypton just made its debut. I don't know. Did you guys see Krypton when it came on Sci-Fi this week?
I caught it.
I haven't yet.
John?
I'll have to admit.
Okay, should I make you go away because we're going to be a couple of spoilers here. It's up to you.
I mean, I can hear him. Go through it.
All right. Well, first of all, the planet will explode one day, so that's a spoiler for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. Is there going to be a baby in a rocket?
Yeah, there'll be a baby. I'm pretty sure there'll be a baby in a rocket. I enjoyed the show. I thought it was really good. I thought that they took. First of all, for those of you who don't know, it is the story of Krypton before it exploded, about 100 or 200 years before Superman is born. We are meeting Superman's grandfather, who I guess is the father of Jor-El and Zor-El, and his name is Segel or Segel, and I have to think that is like an honor to Jerry Siegel.
Jerry Siegel. Mm-hmm.
If it's not, then they missed an opportunity. You're good.
No, I think it is, because I think it goes back to an issue of Starman, where they meet a Siegel. I think it's spelled more explicitly like, or more phonetically like Siegel. But,
yeah, I think you're right,
yes,
and I think it's hilarious. When I heard it, I thought, okay, this is kind of brilliant. I'm wondering if Schuster's going to get his own little tribute, but it was a nice little Easter egg for the people who noticed it. And we start meeting some of the ancestors of Superman and Zod and a few other characters that are known to audiences. But we also get a glimpse into the world of Krypton, if you will, and DC has done a couple of World of Krypton comic books over the years. We get to see a little bit of the caste system, which was set up in the last 10 years. The comic books have gone into it, and I think they did a really good job of sort of building the guilds and the various parts of Kryptonian society. And by the way, if anybody's watching and you want to join in and you have a different opinion, please call in. We'd love to hear from you. This is not just about us talking; it's about you. And I know there must be tens of you out there. So call in at askthemyourself.com and weigh in on all this stuff, including the new gods, if you want to go back to that. So we do see a few things that happen here, but one thing that does happen early on is another character from the DC universe pops up very quickly, and that is a character by the name of Adam Strange. It's a very interesting thing. Do you want to talk about this a little bit? Why don't I let you talk a little bit about this, Steve?
Well, like you said, Adam Strange shows up, and basically he kind of acts as a harbinger, I guess, for Brainiac, who has decided that he is going to travel back in time and destroy Krypton before Superman is born. So,
there's Adam Strange as he appeared in the comic book, and then I think we got a picture of Adam Strange as he appeared. It's really interesting because you're on this alien planet, and all of a sudden you see a guy wearing sneakers and a baseball hat, and he actually starts telling Siegel about that's not the guy we want. This is the guy we want. And he warns him, right, that he's got to help the future. It's go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Well, yeah, basically the whole thing is that he tells him that your grandson is going to be the greatest hero ever known, and if you don't figure out a way to stop Brainiac, and then they give you just the tiniest little peek of this vision of Brainiac, which if you've read the comics, you've seen this version, but I don't think it's been revealed anywhere else. It certainly wasn't. I don't remember. Certainly don't remember it in any of the Justice League
No.
animation or anything like that.
There was a Brainiac on Smallville.
Right.
It wasn't really very. It was sort of like he was just a guy walking around and I don't know.
Yeah, this version. If there's one really good thing about this episode, it's that this Brainiac looks kind of frightening.
He's scary as hell. It's one of the scariest looking villains I've ever seen on a TV show, let alone in a movie or.
Yeah, he's actually, his movements are very very reminiscent of the Ridley Scott Aliens movies.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I would say that that is very true, Steve. And he's known as the Collector of Worlds. And they honestly make him about as scary as you would expect Galactus or Darkseid to be. I mean, he is a real big bad. You know, everybody's like, oh, DC Comics didn't have any good villains until Darkseid came along. They've turned Brainiac into, I think, one of the scariest, like, Thanos-level villain with this. Jonathan hasn't seen it yet. He's like, well, remains to be seen. But his ship is the art direction on this show is just so great. It's the potential for the show, written by David Goyer, who certainly has a lot of
stuff under his belt.
A lot of
Dark Knight stuff.
A lot of Dark Knight stuff. I mean, he's if you're going to get somebody, he's a good guy to get. And what's really cool is Adam Strange, just not to give too much away, but it's a trope that they took from Terminator and from Back to the Future even, where, there's a time limit on how long they have to put the past aright so that Superman doesn't disappear from the future. And so Adam Strange has Superman's cape. And Superman's cape is starting to disappear. And when it disappears completely, we know that there's no chance of getting Superman back. So there's a TikTok on this that's really interesting.
Like a built-in hourglass for the show.
Basically. And it's very similar, by the way, to what they did with the photo of Marty McFly's brother in Back to the Future, which was played by Mark McClure, who also played Jimmy Olsen. So I don't know if it brings it all around. So
Thanks. Nicely done.
Thank you. I'm here for you. I'll be here all week.
Very nice.
So that brings up some of the other things that I hear, and again, spoilers, but these are just rumors that are floating around that Doomsday is slated for an appearance on the show at some point, and that makes a certain amount of sense.
Right.
And Doomsday was the character that killed Superman, the only one that was ever able to kill Superman in the comics for real. And, Superman was dead for a year or two in the comics, but we always come back. So I'm wondering if... do you remember the Doomsday evolution story, John? Jonathan just froze right up.
Doomsday evolution? You mean how he was sort of...
His origin,
created on Krypton.
Yeah, can you relay that?
Yeah, wasn't the idea that he was sort of part of this experiment where they kept on sort of creating this little creature again and again, and they sort of forced its evolution by making it sort of die repeatedly until it became kind of this ultimate sort of killing machine and survivor. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and nothing. Yeah, like it would evolve in each iteration of its.
Right.
Every time it was reborn, it had new. Like it was a little innocent little baby, and then it got killed by all these things, and they kept throwing stuff at it until it turned into this thing that could not be killed, and they couldn't stop it itself because it remembered, and it got revenge on its creators, and then it just went after, and they were Kryptonians, and so then it went after anything that could possibly Kryptonian. It came after Superman, and I'm wondering, since it's 200 years ago in the timeline, I'm wondering if we're going to see the birth of Doomsday.
Oh my God, baby Doomsday! Oh,
right.
That's actually a little frightening.
I'm sure. I wonder if but I like what you've described from what they've done with Adam Strange. I wonder if they'll find a way to tie it into, like, Doomsday always sort of reminded me a bit of the Shaggy Man, right? Like, isn't sort of, do you know Shaggy Man from Justice League? Wasn't he also sort of this unstoppable, indestructible I'd like if there was some sort of Easter egg where there's sort of Shaggy Man technology thrown in there as well, just to reward all of us who know our obscure Justice League
your
villains.
obscure Justice League. I have to tell you, I find it very difficult to be scared of a guy named Shaggy Man, but that's just me.
Yeah. No, I agree. Although, didn't he become ultimately the General when General Eiling got his brain put inside the Shaggy Man, and then they shaved the Shaggy Man in Grant Morrison's run on Justice League? I mean, that's, I know we were sort of knocking DC earlier in comparison to Marvel, but I do have to say one of DC's great strengths is, whether it's sort of its longer history or just sort of it not being as sort of tight a universe. Like, I think a great thing about DC is that it has all these just sort of great stuff where people are just sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah.
And there's just decades of spaghetti stuck on the wall that you can then just sort of peel off, and you've got Adam Strange showing up on Krypton, and you've got, I think that's one of the things I really love about the DC universe, and I kind of miss about old Who's Who comics that came out in the mid-'80s, where, you'd be reading these character profiles of all these random characters across the DC universe, and it was just this crazy, bizarre stuff. And I think that's something that DC has going for it a little bit more than Marvel does.
Well, at a certain point, DC...
Marvel's a little too New York-based, I think.
It's also very continuity-based. Continuity became the big buzzword at a certain point when Marvel sort of created this universe, and it was only about 10 years old or 15 years old. They sort of, people sort of almost aged in real time, and then they stopped aging.
Right.
They fell into a lot of the same things that DC did. Marvel ended up having a crisis of their own right around the same time in their history that DC did their own crisis and tried to reboot, and DC's had a couple of reboots since then in the comics. As a result, like you said, they have these little pockets, and at certain points DC in the early years were ignoring their own continuity. You had the Aquaman Atlantis, and then you had the Lori Lamaris Atlantis, where they were all mermaids and mermen, and
Aryan Atlantis.
That's right. That's right. So, and then they said, okay, well, now we're going to have multiple parallel worlds, and that'll kind of explain it. And now DC has 52 parallel worlds, but there might be more worlds, and everybody's always kind of rebooting everything. Yep. And it's kind of nice to be sort of in the movie universe, everything sort of reboots anyway. Every time there's a new iteration of Superman or Smallville or Superboy or Krypton or Gotham or Batman. Like, they all sort of exist in their own universes, and I'm kind of okay with that, because it means if they make a mistake, they can sort of flush it down the toilet if they have a bad movie and just sort of pretend like it didn't happen. Anybody see Catwoman with Halle Berry? It's like you can make those mistakes and say, okay, let's just move on to the next one. Same thing with like Elektra or Daredevil and Marvel. They said, it didn't happen. But DC, by sort of deciding that they were going to have a universe, sort of made a whole bunch of mistakes on a big level. But their TV shows, they keep getting them right. The TV shows sort of scaling them down works better, I think, for DC's characters, especially because each of them can have their own universe. And you can have a Flash on TV and a Flash in the movies, and the audience gets it. They're sort of like, okay, they're two different Flashes.
Also, I think the advantage with the TV show is you have more time to tell the story. It's like, if I make a Flash movie, it's 2 hours. And in 2 hours, I have to make you love the Flash, feel sorry for the Flash at times. I got to get you all the way through a story arc and conclude that to everybody in the world's liking who's ever read a Flash comic book. I have to satisfy all those people in 2 hours. You've got a better shot at doing that with a series.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think also TV series, I think, works better for sort of the weaknesses of DC's characters, right? In that DC didn't have a snappy Stan Lee to provide characterization for a lot of their characters. I mean, if you look back on a lot of these Silver Age DC characters, personality-wise, a lot of them were originally, back in the day, kind of bland, interchangeable guys.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, whereas, you know, Marvel definitely sort of had a specific tone, whereas, you know, I don't know, correct me if you disagree, but like, okay, Hal Jordan was the pilot guy.
Mm-hmm.
Barry Allen was the
police
crime
guy.
scientist guy.
Yeah.
Right? Ray Palmer was the professor scientist guy. But like there wasn't really anything to them. You know, and I think what's great about DC for the TV series is then you can actually flesh out these characters in a way that I think they didn't really start to get fleshed out really in the comic books until relatively recently, when, you know, Jeff Johns, I think, tries to give them distinct personalities that they didn't have before.
Right.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of that going on. I think a lot of people sort of tried to give the characters some personality in the last however many years. And they did, but you know, I mean, even Denny O'Neil with the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff, you know, they had.
That's true. Yep.
You know, they did have personalities. Batman became an obsessive sociopath at a certain point. I'm like, oh, okay. You know, right. I mean, and Wally West certainly had a great personality, and you know, so there over the years there have been certain writers and certain people who have given the DC characters a bit more difference in who they were.
And there's been some
even personality grabs.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I think because there was a certain level of lack of specific personality types, that it gives them a lot more freedom to do what they want to when they adapt them for TV, because people don't have as giant expectations for who these characters are going to be, you know. And I think that gives them a lot of leeway to play.
True. Because also, if they play New Gods with that same sort of free hand, sleight of hand kind of way that Guardians of the Galaxy was handled, that could be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't forget, I mean, the New Gods, Kirby never played the New Gods for comedy. You know.
Oh, no.
They were huge and bombastic and over the top, and they had big themes, and they had life and anti-life and Nazis and you know, Glorious Godfrey was his take on Billy Graham, for Pete's sake,
right.
And Flunky Flashman was his vengeance against Stan Lee, and you know, there was a lot of stuff going on in these. I mean, he had so much stuff in him that he just packed and baked every page with. There was enough on each page to do a movie all by itself. So I think a limited series, you know, for TV might do more justice to the New Gods at the end of the day.
And also, no, I know that you know, the writing
right.
style was different back then, but I'm just also thinking about what would actually ultimately appeal to, appeal to today's audience, so to speak. Because if everything is just, you know, people in very intricate costumes talking like this, then, you know, that it may not fly.
What do you think, John?
You know, it's funny. I do think, you know, we've sort of gotten onto, you know, you mentioned whether New Gods would be a better limited series and how DC's strength seems to be more in television. I mean, New Gods is an ongoing saga with so much going on that I think it would work better as television. I mean, just think about even just the sort of subplot about the pact that Highfather and Darkseid make, swapping their sons.
Yeah.
You know, and then being able to sort of witness over time scot-free growing up, you know, in Granny Goodness's orphanage and trying to sort of hold on to who he is, you know, while it's getting beaten out of him. You know, and then in parallel getting to watch Orion, who's this savage. And the way sort of Highfather helps him to become kind of a kind being. I think that's sort of a great story arc that you could do over the course of the series. and then all the sort of Tales of the New God backstories that, sort of how Darkseid became Darkseid and how his brother became the Infinity Man, and you've got all that great stuff, and then even some of the stuff that Simonson did later in his ill-fated Orion series. And this is where talking about rehabilitating the Green Lantern movies. I think Simonson did this great. What was this character called? It was like the Green Flame or something. It was the Green Lantern who came to Apokolips and tried to liberate Apokolips and failed, and the Guardians kind of disavowed him because they didn't want to get into an overt war with Darkseid.
Yeah.
So there's been this Green Lantern kind of behind enemy lines on Apokolips all these years, just a few minutes charge left in his power ring. I mean, that's great stuff. That there's no way they're going to get all that, into their 2-hour movie.
Sometimes
I guess I do kind of wish sort of an ongoing series instead of a Star Wars-like film.
Sometimes a comic book just needs to be a comic book.
Yeah.
Well,
but I am looking forward to seeing what they do with it. I hope she's up to it. I have not seen A Wrinkle in Time, which when I was 9 years old was probably my favorite book that got me into reading science fiction in a big way. And my wife loved that book, and it was the gateway drug for so many kids to get into science fiction at the time, and probably since then. And I think a lot of people had a lot of hopes for A Wrinkle in Time. I have not seen it, so I don't want to prejudge it. I will probably go see it soon. But based on what I heard, I feel badly that it did not measure up to what people were hoping it would be. I like the fact that our directors for these blockbusters are getting more diverse, but I also want to see them succeed, and I want to see them put the best person as the writer and as the director. Certainly visually, I'm hoping that this thing puts Kirby on the screen in a way that nobody's ever seen. It's gonna be hard, but this is, I think somebody said this is what Kirby envisioned for his, was it a trilogy or quadrilogy? What would you call it? Does Jimmy Olsen even count in the trilogy?
It's hard to even say because the whole thing got cut off prematurely anyway.
Yes, it did.
Right? And then sort of Kirby came back later and did the Hunger Dogs, but it was kind of, it didn't all come together, right?
Yeah, they left it open-ended a little bit, I think. That's what happened. So,
although I guess if you approach the whole thing like Lord of the Rings, if you go into it, I mean, I guess that was sort of the gamble that Peter Jackson took with Lord of the Rings, where they went in committed to a trilogy, and whether or not that first one bombed, like they had 2 other movies effectively. Well, they shot the first 2 back to back? Is that what they did?
Something like that.
Like,
yeah.
did they sort of were committed to the whole thing, whether or not the first one did well, right?
They did that. They did that with Superman also. They did that with Superman.
Right.
Okay, quick story about Superman 1 and 2. While I got you here, and then we're going to have to sort of wrap things up real quick. Superman 1 and 2. The original plot for Superman 1 and 2, as presented to Carmine Infantino, who told me this story himself, was written by Francis Ford Coppola, and it involved a plot in the Vatican to kill the Pope. That was the first plot submitted for the Superman movie.
Really?
Yeah, and he wrote it, and they ended up not. You heard it here first, and they ended up not going with that. But guess what?
Imagine that.
Yeah.
But guess what happened to that plot?
It ended up in Godfather 3?
You got it.
Oh,
bing,
wow.
bing, 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 bing. It was Godfather 3.
Yeah.
He really wanted to tell that story. Anyway, guys, wrapping up. See, I want to always give a little, so people have to stay to the very end of the show. Anything further, guys? Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Anything further from you, John?
I really want to see what they do with the Tomorrow people, how they handle the sort of hippie stuff, and then the Harrys and the Mountain of Judgment, and all that crazy Project Cadmus, DNA Alien. I mean, just Kirby. There's just so much richness to Kirby that I want to see what they do with it all, even if it ends up being terrible, just so that I know that they've sort of mined it as much as possible. I'm really curious to see where they go with all of that.
True enough. And Steve, anything you want to tell us about before we go?
Well, I guess I'm feeling the same way. I'm actually looking forward to see how KRYPTON develops, especially since we also, one of the other things that got thrown in there, I guess, was that we got to see the Zod family early on, so being very warlike. So that was a nice surprise, and I'd like to see how that's going to develop.
Great. That's it. That's all we have time for today. I hope you guys will come back sometime. Next week, I think I have a really good guest coming, but I can't say because it's not confirmed yet. Steve knows who it is. And I think maybe we'll get some more phone calls. Maybe you guys will call in because I'm sure you'll have questions for my guest. I'll be back next week. Until then, please go to askthemyourself.com, log in, become a member. We want to get some more conversation going. You guys were great. And we will be back next week at 9 p.m. Eastern here for Pop Goes the Culture's Ask Them Yourself. Don't forget, please go to my Patreon page if you like what I'm doing and put some money into it so we can keep doing it. And if you don't like what we're doing, put some money so we can keep doing it. I don't care. And I will see you next time.